Hello everybody, welcome back to Charlie's Port Plumbing Service Call Adventures. For today's call, the lady said that there was damage to her ceiling, and like you could see, there's obviously some sort of water damage. Fortunately, we were able to find out that the water was coming from a leaking air valve coming from the baseboard above. I didn't have my camera on when I found the leak, but this is why we're down in the boiler room. We have to drain the boiler down a little bit so when we take the air valve off, we don't get sprayed with water. Now that ball valve that I turned off is the feed valve. That feed valve feeds the boiler water. So with the feed valve off, there's no more pressure going into the boiler. That's why I'm draining it down at each zone. The first zone was the baseboard. I knew that because that was a 3/4 line. And the second zone was this big cast iron radiator upstairs on the 3rd floor, which was that 1-inch line.
Okay.
Now this lady said that this air valve was leaking a little bit, so of course I went ahead and changed it for her.
Thank you.
A little funny story, the first time I came here, I figured that I'd be able to do this first because I didn't have any of the hot water air valves in my van. So I would just come back a later day to do the baseboard downstairs. But I always figured that these big cast iron radiators were always powered by a steam boiler. That was not the case because when I put the air valve on, the steam air valve on, water was just spewing out because of course that is not the right valve. Luckily I put the old valve back on, and when I got back to my shop, my boss sort of misunderstood me and thought that I kept the steam air valve on this. So he was sort of freaking out, thinking that this house is going to get flooded because I kept that air valve on. Fortunately, I took it off. Now this is that baseboard on the 2nd floor, below that cast iron radiator above. And this is where that leak was coming from, into the ceiling. It was a very small leak, small drip, but of course, a leak's a leak, and eventually water could do some major damage, even when it's just dripping like that. So we cleaned up the corrosion a little bit, the best I could, and we put the new air valve on. That was really it. That's all that had to be done. The hardest part of this job was probably trying to figure out that boiler. I had to figure out which zone was which because on the left side there were some other zones, so I had to trace it all the way back, and luckily the 3/4 line really sold it because of that baseboard. It told me that that baseboard was a 3/4 line. And this is me turning the water back onto the boiler, opening up that feed valve, filling the boiler back up, and bringing up that pressure. Now I'm checking for leaks, making sure there's no more drip, and we looked it up there. Time to go upstairs to the 3rd floor. It looks good here too. Nice and dry. Last but not least, we're going to purge the zones that we just drained. This is because when you drain a zone, it introduces air into the system. Now we didn't have to take too many buckets out. We just had to lower the level of water above. So we didn't have to drain the whole system, so there wasn't a lot of air, but it is still necessary to purge the system to make sure it's running properly when we turn it back on. Now we're purging the 2nd zone. This is the radiator all the way on the 3rd floor. And we're going to do a bucket each for each side. And that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. See you guys next time.